G'day, everyone. It's been a little while. I'm super excited. We've got Charlotte. Well, we always have Charlotte, right? But we have the fabulous Dee from Colorado joining us. And before I throw it out for our discussion, people, you're probably out there going, why are you wearing those hats, you weirdos? And it's because when we were in Colorado training, and Dee was a part of that, we went and bought these hats. So we thought we're just going to wear them because, our Colorado buddy, and there you go. So welcome, Dee. Super happy to have you. How are you?
I'm doing so good and I'm so happy to be here. And I just would like to publicly announce I missed the memo for the hats. So that's why I'm left out. But as a Colorado native, I'll just have my invisible hat on to join you all. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Charlotte, how are you? You're sitting there very quietly, cute little hat on.
Well, I was thinking that for all of the listeners who are just listening and not seeing the video, Robyn and I are sporting some pretty awesome cowboy hats, and Dee's wearing their invisible hat right now. But I'm good. I'm really glad to see you too, Dee. I've missed you. I miss seeing you we've spent a couple of years where we got to see you all the time, so it's really nice to connect and see you like on Zoom.
I know, I miss you guys so much.
Hey, it's the mutual miss each other society. That's the thing with you're in Colorado and we're in Canada at the moment, so it's a little bit harder to see each other. But hey, the reason we asked you to come on this podcast is A, because of your sparkling personality, but B, I know that when we first had you in training, you had come from a more clinical job. And so we were got you into the peer support training and were, giving you a little hard time, challenging you in places, and you've just rocked into your own in the peer support world. And every time I do training in Colorado now, all I hear is D, 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 D. So I would love to hear a little bit about your journey.
Yeah. Well, I will never forget the day that you came up to me in training and said, we're just going to have to shake that clinical out of you. Because I still tell that story in training. So yeah, not only have I come from 10 and a half years of clinical and stepped into the peer role and just absolutely love it, I also, because of my recovery and my experiences, get to facilitate training for AFRC as well. And I tell that story for folks who are coming from a clinical background because I just say you gotta let go of everything that you have learned and just step into it like we do when we're in recovery or we're discovering mental wellness for the first time, and learn how to rehumanize on a more authentic level. And I think that's the part that really has helped me flourish as well as supported me in being a peer, is the fact that I get to show up unapologetically and authentically as myself, as opposed to a clinical role where there's this mask of professionalism and authority that I just never could wholeheartedly stand in.
It's that interesting piece when you said humanize, because I've always talked about that really when I think about supporting people with mental health issues or are dealing with drug and alcohol stuff, that really all we want to do is get our human back on. and be with people and like be in this space that people feel seen, heard, and validated. So actually, I'd love to run a course one day called Getting Your Human Back On, because I think that's what it's about. But Charlotte, like, what do you think?
Well, you know what, Dee, I wanted you maybe to tell the listeners how you went from that clinical world that you were so passionate about, and then you did this, hey, let me just see what peer support is all about. And so just so the listeners can have an idea of what that was like for you.
Oh, yeah. So it's so funny because I was just talking about that this morning of if you had asked me 6 years ago what my 10-year plan was, I would have told you I was going to be a neuropsychologist because I wanted to be able to tell people what kind of medication to take, but not be responsible for prescribing it. And deep down, low key, I wanted my baby daddies to have to call me Dr. D. So that was my plan. And through my education at MSU, I was asked to be a part of this Reimagine Wellness pitch where I was paired with a classmate and we had to essentially come up with a pitch of an organization that supported community that wasn't already being supported. And that's when I found out about peer support professionals. And during that time, I was really, really having my own, in Robyn's words, mental health adventure, and not the good kind, um, at my current job, which was clinical. It was a methadone clinic. I was the care navigator supervisor. So I had a team of care navigators all across the campus. And I was tossing my resume into Indeed and praying for something different. And then I found out about peer work, and that's when I got in touch with Advocates for Recovery Colorado and really started to understand what peers were. I had never heard of them before. I had never been a part of that community. I know it's
That's awful.
blasphemy.
We need to shout from the rooftops more.
I know, exactly. And, talking about advocacy and movements, like that's my biggest, that is where I sit now, but I digress. I'll get to that in a minute. But I learned more about peer work and kind of started getting an understanding from my supervisor, Sean, before I entered into the training, but I still had no idea what that meant. And it was through the 60 hours of training that I realized that my story matters. Right? And I can say this because the person I'm married to is getting his clinical licensure to be a therapist. And so often he comes and he says things like, I really wish I could have told this client, like, hey, man, I get it. I used to drink a bunch too, and I can't. And so then I get to sit in my gleeful little corner and be like, hee, I do, And so that's what it means is like, that cliche saying of if you find a job you love, you never work a day in your life could not be more applicable because I get to support people, I get to tell my story, and I get to do really cool things because I have space to authentically show up as myself. So I think for me, that's why I don't have anything against clinical. It's just I'm not meant to do clinical, if that makes sense.
Totally. I think there's people that, and I want to say I'm not anti-clinical either. I think there's a place for all of the disciplines, and peer support is a discipline in its own right for me. And I think there's that place about being able to share a story with someone about having had a tough time and dealt with substances or dealt with mental health adventures. And I do want to say that mental health adventures didn't come originally from me. Came from a friend of mine, Allie Linford in Oregon, and I loved it. So asked if I could, use it. But it is that place of we don't want to tell people all the war and illness and gory bits, but we want to share enough that people go, oh, yeah, you've had some tougher times too. And I think Charlotte's always on about, yes, for the families, because they need that kind of peer support too, eh, Charlotte?
Oh, absolutely. When you were talking, Dee, I was just thinking of often when we connect with a person that we're supporting and they look at us and they say, you went through something similar, and it's like and you're still here and you're doing this job, and it's just like the light goes off, and there's maybe, I know I'm going to use that word, Robyn, there might be hope for me too. And Robyn has an interesting relationship with the word hope, but I often think that in our role as a peer supporter, sometimes we are that showing up as that hope in, I was able to change my world or figure things out or do something different, whatever that is. And here I am in this role supporting you to maybe take a look at areas of your world that you want to. And I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I'm just going to be here to support you. Well, you know me, I love peer support, so I'm going to talk the
What is that? Like, I'm just going to be here to support you, right? I'm not going to tell you what to do or how to do it. So maybe you want to answer this, Dee, like, because I talk about this all the time. People might be sick of my voice, but what do you think it is that we do that makes that magic?
Hmm. That's a really great question. And for me, how it's shown up for me in supporting others, because I never had a peer support, and I couldn't agree with Charlotte more of if my mom had had somebody else who said, I don't know what you're going through, but I know what it felt like for me when my daughter or my son was going through these experiences, I think our relationship would be very different. And for me, I learned all of these modalities of therapy and like different clinical ways to motivationally interview folks and ask those open-ended questions. And then when I started showing up in that peer role, it was those moments where I got to sit with somebody and ask, what does your recovery or wellness look like for you? And it was hard the first time a person said, I don't know, right? Because they knew what their mom wanted their recovery to look like, or they knew what their partner wanted their recovery to look like. But no one had actually taken the time to ask them, what does that mean to you? And what do you want to do? Right? Because as you guys know, I'm a huge advocate for all pathways. And I'm a huge advocate for not shortcutting somebody's discovery. And so when you put that ball in their court and they're looking at you like, what do I do? Sitting with somebody in that moment when they get to choose and they have that autonomy and they have that voice, I think that is like incomparable in any other field.
Hey, you were talking about all pathways, and some of the listeners might know what that means and some mightn't. But when I think about that for me, and I'd love to hear your version, Charlotte, and yours, Dee, for me, that means if someone's dealing with, what the world calls substance use issues, that maybe they choose abstinence, but maybe they choose harm reduction. Maybe they're using some kind of medication to assist their recovery. You talked about being in the methadone clinic before, and when I think about mental health, I go, well, some people, medication's a tool. For me, I didn't like the side effects. I had to work out how to support myself other ways. I'm not anti or pro any kind of treatment or medication. I'm pro informed choice. So for some people, it's learning how to deal with what the world might call symptoms. I probably call them interesting times myself, but and being able to work out how do I get through them, even if they're still showing up. And it could be a range of things. You know, people talk about sleep and diet and exercise. Some people are like into journaling and meditation and box breathing. Not for me. But, you know, it is that when I think about it, it's whatever that person kind of explores and decide for themselves that it looks like for them. What about you, Charlotte? Like thinking about that all pathways conversation.
Well, the all pathways conversation on the family side. Well, the first story I wanted to tell was the time I was sharing with, and I wasn't doing a family peer support. I was just having a conversation with a person, and their family had kept saying, you have to be abstinent, you have to be abstinent. They had never heard of other pathways. And the look in their eyes was, you mean there's alternatives to abstinence? And I was thinking of that video you did, Robyn, with John, where he was the same. He only knew abstinence, and that wasn't working for him. And again, hope showed up. I mean, there's other ways that I can live with what's happening for me and support myself and not do what I'm failing at. And so on the family side, it is having those conversations that there are multiple pathways, and to support their family member to look at all of the options, not just the one that we think that they should do. And that was me years ago. This is the wellness journey that I wanted, you know, for my child. And I listed everything out what I wanted, you know, abstinence, back in school, not hanging out with certain friends. These were all what I thought wellness looked like for them. Never once asking what it was, you know, what it was for her. And so that can be hard for families to hear, especially if they're getting outside influence from others, you know, which usually is that abstinence route. And so being able to have conversations with families to support knowledge around all of the options or all the pathways, and supporting their person to figure out what that pathway is. And I see that when that happens, conflict goes down in families and open communications go up, which is a beautiful thing. You start to be able to have conversations of, well, what did you find out when you were Googling multiple pathways? Because that's what people do. Or, you know, what did you find out when you looked at what a harm reduction recovery looks like, and how, and supporting the family. And this is my job. You know, how did that feel for you? You know, what were you thinking about? And often it led to other exploring of other options. But what ultimately happens is being able to have open conversations with their family member, and hearing what they have to say without judging first.
Love that. Hey, Dee, I know that you know, you are also a parent of, you know, like someone who may be dealing with their own stuff, let's put it that way. And you and I have chatted a little bit. And so I think I've heard you talk about how you've utilized some of the skills you learned in peer support and took them into being able to have some cool conversations, you know, with your child. Is there anything around that you'd be happy to share? I know I've put you on the spot.
No, it's totally fine. I'm actually really glad that you asked, because his story and what has shifted in our dynamic has been really incredible since I took the training and shifted my perspective of how to best show up for him. And I learned a lot of my skills from listening to Char, of, like Charlotte just said it, the whole, you know, listening to what they want to experience or what they want to do. So for the listeners who don't know, my son is on the autism spectrum. He is what they, and I'm just going to reiterate, I hate that they scale it like this, but he's what they consider high functioning. I don't like that they have high versus low. It's really distressing to me. And he is a differently wired person. I always tell people in layman's terms, he's a Mac in a PC world. I have no idea what that is like. I also have no idea what being a teenager with that kind of capacity is like. And I have learned so much just by showing up and saying, and I've even used Char's advice in the past of, do you want real mom or do you want peer mom? Because there's a difference. And so 9 times out of 10, they choose peer mom. And when I have gone through these experiences, like I had texted you once, Robyn, I think because he was self-harming, and I had my own ideas of self-harm before the training of there are alternatives. And after speaking with you, Rob, that conversation with him turned into a harm reduction conversation of how do we keep our tools clean? And I think part of, and hear me when I say it's still a tool that he utilizes, right? And it's less frequent. And I think it's because I was able to sit down with him and say, okay, well, if we're not going to not use sharp objects, how do we keep them clean? How do we keep the wound clean? And what does that look like? And because of that, that particular coping mechanism is less frequent. And there's been more conversations of what are some alternatives. And that's when we found, I forget what they're called. I think they're called little ouchies. And they're just little 3D printed cylinders that are spiky, and you squeeze them and it does something, gives off the same kind of receptors as actual like other forms of self-harm. And so, because of stepping into the peer world and because of more authentically owning genuinely curious conversations, I'm able to sit with him and have conversations. I watch it actually with my husband who tries to practice therapy. And I'm like, what? Get out of here with that. Don't therapize my child. Take your terrible MI and see yourself out. But I get to show up with genuine curiosity of what is supportive for him. What does he need from me? And I don't know. So leaving that space for him to say it and decide on his own, I think has really delivered some self-efficacy and like autonomy for him.
That just makes my heart happy, right? Because I know, I'm not a parent, but I can imagine that parents get a little freaked out with some of the self-harm options, that whether it's under 18 or an adult, I think there's still that worry. I'm looking at Charlotte's face going, yep. And I think being able to be in a conversation about that, and as you said, his self-harm with that tool is decreasing. And I think some of that, from my experience talking with people and my own kind of self-harm, which is a little different, but when it's not a huge deal and there's no judgment and there's no stigma and discrimination about, oh my gosh, you do that, it gives us the freedom to have a conversation about it in a way that I'm just like, validation's not the exact word I'm looking for, but it feels like it's okay to have the thoughts, and validating that's okay to have the thoughts actually helps me not do it as much. That's a roundabout way of chatting. Oh, Charlotte, help me out here.
Well, and one of the things as you were sharing, Dee, and thank you for talking about this subject, where I go is, and then, family members, so parents like you, Dee, also need some support, because that's a really hard place to hold yourself together in order to support your child. I know that the first time that I had an experience with self-harm, I was teary. I was so sad. I said all the wrong things because I just didn't understand self-harm. And then you don't want to tell people what you've seen because of a little bit of shame, isolation. You don't want to let this story out that it's happening in your family. You don't understand it. And why I love family peer support is you can bring this topic up to a family peer supporter. They will support you and support you to look at what tools you need to support yourself, so that when you have that opportunity to try again and talk about self-harm with your family member, you got a better shot of holding yourself together and having that curious conversation and doing what you said, Dee, about, if you're going to do it, let's talk about keeping your tools clean, your wounds clean, so it doesn't become a bigger problem. And then that trust that your child has with you from that conversation too, it just goes up because you didn't freak out, right?
And I will add to that too. That was like the one perfect conversation I've had, especially since landing into the peer support world, because we have been on some adventures since I last saw you guys. And to reiterate what you were saying, Char, like it's not like I sat across from him and was like, okay, let's have this calm and complacent conversation. Like there was a time that I had to walk away and like, and because of the education and training, I'm learning how to better feel my emotions in front of my kids, so that when I say it's okay to have feelings, like I'm not hiding that from them. I'm getting uncomfortable with myself. But I had to walk away and kind of have my breakdown and then come back and say, like, I want to support you the best I can. And if finding alternatives isn't it, then let's have this harm reduction conversation. And, like I said, there have been other incidences with his own mental health adventures of like him feeling extremely suicidal or having this like cyclical negative self-talk of being unlovable and unlikable. And then out of the blue, this kid was nominated for homecoming court. And I'm like, let's back it up. Like people who are not liked don't get nominated, my friend. And so it's been this really cumbersome and clumsy experience. And I feel with peer core values and the peer perspective, and just again, like bringing my human back. I love the way that you put that, Robyn, and I'm going to use that. I can be in real time as opposed to my spouse who I watch, who will sit there and analyze and dissect and think of all of these different like modalities and treatments and like, okay, if this question doesn't work, let's go this way, instead of just authentically being present and in the moment, which I think is what people who are seeking support are really seeking, is presence.
Yeah. And look, here's the thing. I did a little video for World Mental Health Day the other day, and I said it's great that we celebrate it, but why don't we celebrate it every day? Or like Suicide Prevention Day and stuff like that. I'm like, if we could make these conversations just another part of the conversation, and it wasn't this, self-harm or suicide or mental health or, oh my God, you've got substance use issues. If we could be in that, getting our human back on and just connecting as two people, right? And I'm having a conversation with another individual and I care about what's happening for them. I just wonder if things would be exponentially different if people felt they could share those kind of things without the judgment, the stigma and discrimination.
That's how you solve world peace, right?
I should be up for a Nobel Peace Prize.
You should.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You know, I'm just having a bit of fun out there. But it is that place, right, where I wish we could just get back to being authentically human with each other and connecting like that. And I think that will make the difference. And I do see the clinical world in parts changing. I've heard people talking about not giving diagnosis. And I'm like, yes, just be with people. Although, don't get me wrong, I know some people love to have a diagnosis because they go, oh, thank goodness, it makes sense now. Or thank goodness I can get a certain medication that helps or whatever. But, you know, for many people, it's really tough. And it just because of the stigma and discrimination that comes with that, people feel like, well, I'm done. My life's over now. And so I just,
You know, Robyn, I think that the diagnosis part that you mentioned about clinical, some are getting away from diagnosis. It's like, and I just want for, you know, listeners out there to, and you can add to it, Robyn, is when someone gets a diagnosis, it can look so different to so many people. You know, I know of many people in my world who have the diagnosis of bipolar, and it looks so different to each of them, and yet they all have that same diagnosis. And what clinical are going to is taking a look of what's happening for the person rather than giving the label. And so to understand better of, you know, this is what it looks like for me, and these are some of the things that I'm working on, and maybe here's a pathway that may or may not involve medication, but like really customized. We'll use that word customized to the person. Do you want to add to that, Rob?
yeah, I just want to say we're still in a world where it's predominantly not that. And we're always going to keep saying, please look at this. And the peer world does that. The peer world says, hey, what's happening for you? Like, what's it look like? How's that show up? You know, and I'm hoping that as we infiltrate throughout the world, that sounds like we're after taking away. I still want to say we need clinicians too. I am not saying we need to get rid of them. I am saying that, like, as we come from that authentic place and just be with people, I think that supports clinicians to, I know some are starting to share their own experiences, and that has people connect on a different level. And it's not peer support per se, because they have a different job description, but it's being human. Hey, Dee, we're almost at time. Like, do you have some mic drop moments for us that you want to share?
Oh boy. That one, Well, I do want to reiterate the clinical piece of I love my best friend who's a clinician. I sometimes really like the person I married who's a clinician. I have my own therapist. My kids have their own therapists. Like the way I describe it to folks when trying to kind of encapsulate where peers sit in supporting people, whether it's with substances or mental health or family or being released from incarceration, you name it. We all exist on this highway of this continuum of care for an individual, right? Doctors have their lanes, the social workers have their lanes, the case managers have their lanes, and then peers and therapists have their own lanes, but they're very separate. parallel, but very separate. And when we start to cross over, the dotted white line, like, sure, we can pass people, that's fine. It's when we stay in the passing lane a little too long that it becomes blurred and the role integrity is taken away. And I think one of the most important things that I try so hard to advocate for is there's no better role in supporting an individual. We're all there to essentially be a leg on the table or a piece of the pyramid. And for me, I found that I get to not mask in peer support, which is, I think, the most important thing for me because I am a felon. I did not have custody of my children for 18 months. I was sleeping out of my car until I lost that. I was supposed to be kicked out of family integrated treatment court and had this bulldog of a therapist advocate for me and not kick me out. And because of all of those experiences, I get to sit on this podcast with you. I get to train peer recovery coach training. I got to facilitate a parade for the first time for Advocates Rally for Recovery, which was when I step back and I'm like, that's not D. D doesn't deserve that, right? And that's old thoughts and old behaviors of that stigma and that self-stigma. But I get to do these things because I unapologetically and authentically show up as myself as a peer.
I think you just did the mic drop, Charlotte.
Always love seeing you, Dee, and so inspired by all that you do. And thank you for hanging out with Rob and I today.
Thanks for having me. I hope that we get to revisit soon. And if you guys ever make it to Colorado, I got other cool places that we can visit. So we'll get boots for our hats.
Hey, I've already got boots for my hat. Love them. All right. Thanks, everyone. And we will see you, or you'll hear us, because we sound pretty cool on these podcasts. Catch you soon.